Siguli, hello everyone. Thank you for joining us today. We are going to wait for some more relatives to log on. So again, thank you for being here. Please feel free to grab some water, a cup of tea or coffee, and get settled in with us today. Siguli, hello. We will get started in about 2 minutes. We will get started shortly as we wait for folks to join us in a moment. All right, Siguli Swagwek, if you're just joining us, thank you for being here. We are waiting for more folks to join us today. So if you haven't, grab some water, grab some coffee, grab some tea, and we will be ready to dive into this really important discussion. Okay. So I think we can get started. We have a lot of relatives here joining us from all over the world. Siguli Swagwek, Daisy Nyung Yats, Anawal Niwagi Delota, Onaya de Aga, Niwagu Hujonta. Hi everyone, my name is Daisy Francor. I am a citizen of the United Nations of Wisconsin, and I am the Director of Strategic Partnerships and Communications at Cultural Survival. I'm really excited to be here with all of you today to have a really important dialogue around the criminalization of Indigenous land defenders. But before we get started today, I want to just open up the space in a good way and express my deepest gratitude to all the panelists here, to our moderator, to everyone behind the scenes, and all of you here joining us today. I also want to express my deepest gratitude to Mother Earth and all of her resiliency for allowing us to have such thriving ecosystems and food systems and such a living in such a state of abundance. And I also want to give gratitude to all the four-legged, the two-legged, and the winged beings, and those who swim in the sea for being a part of these ecosystems alongside of us. So again, y'all won't go. Thank you all for being here. Just as we prepare to kick off, this webinar is co-sponsored by Cultural Survival and Ricochet Media. And for those who aren't aware of Cultural Survival's work, we are a 50-year-old Indigenous-led and Indigenous rights organization based in Cambridge, Massachusetts, in the so-called United States. And we advocate for Indigenous people's rights and support Indigenous community self-determination, cultures, and political resilience. And again, super excited for this conversation and our relative, Brandy Morin, who will be moderating and launching the discussion shortly. Before we start, I just want to go through a few housekeeping items. For those who are joining us either via Zoom, we do have an interpretation tool available. So if you're on the Zoom platform, there is a globe icon on the bottom. Please click on that and choose your preferred language. We will have Spanish and English interpretation available. The webinar is also being recorded and live streamed both on our Facebook page and YouTube. So you can also catch the recorded versions there. And if you do have any questions, please utilize the chat function or the Q&A function on Zoom directly. So with that, thank you all for joining us. And I'm excited to introduce our moderator here today, Brandy Morin. Brandy Morin is an award-winning Cree, Iroquois, and French journalist from Treaty 6 territory in Alberta. And for the last 10 years, Brandy has specialized in sharing Indigenous stories, some which have sparked change and reconciliation in Canada's political, cultural, and social landscapes. And a lot of her work has appeared in publications across in National Geographic, The Guardian, Vice, Elle, New York Times, and so much more. And with that being said, I'm just really excited for you to be here, Brandy. And with that, handing it off to you in a good way to launch us into the discussion. Yawa, thank you.
Taniki, thank you, everybody. Tanse, it's good to be here. I'm coming to you from Treaty 6 territories in so-called Alberta, Canada. I am from the Michelle First Nation. And as Daisy said, I specialize in telling Indigenous stories nationally and internationally. It is an honor and a privilege to be here today to moderate this conversation with Cultural Survival and Ricochet Media, who I do freelance work for, an independent publication in Canada. And I just want to say welcome to everybody in attendance and thank you to the panelists that are joining us today. So the criminalization of Indigenous land defenders is nothing new. This has been going on since colonization. And the majority of the work that I do as a journalist revolves around the criminalization of our people. I've been reporting on the crisis that has been happening in so-called northern British Columbia regarding the Wet'suwet'en hereditary people who are fighting a natural gas pipeline being constructed on their unceded territories, which has seen militarized police forcibly remove the Wet'suwet'en and their supporters from their territories while defending their lands. They have allies such as the Gitxsan, which are neighboring to the Wet'suwet'en, and the Gitxsan, have ancient pacts with the Wet'suwet'en, and the Gitxsan now also, are being targeted for standing in solidarity with the Wet'suwet'en and for asserting their rights, their sovereignty over their territories. And we know that the criminalization of our people involving corporations that are now giving the power to prosecute Indigenous land defenders or lawyers that represent them is very alarming. And that's what we're here to discuss today, as well as the other territories where in Nepal and in Guatemala, where Indigenous land defenders are being targeted. So it's my pleasure to introduce our panelists today, and I'm going to start with Chief Spoke. Now, he is a Gitxsan hereditary chief, and based out of so-called northern British Columbia. Chief Spoke was arrested in 2020, along with over a dozen other land defenders at a railway blockade the Gitxsan set up on their traditional territories in support of the Wet'suwet'en hereditary chiefs that were opposing the Coastal GasLink pipeline. And so CN Railway had obtained an injunction to remove the land defenders. However, civil charges laid against the land defenders were later dropped. In late 2021, lawyers for the British Columbia Prosecution Service advised a judge that there was no public interest in pursuing criminal contempt charges against 3 of the land defenders. One of them included Chief Spoke. But in response, the judge ruled the trial would go ahead anyway, with CN lawyers serving as the prosecutors. If found guilty, the sentence is 5 years in prison, the maximum. But as of late January 2022, CN advised the media it doesn't plan to pursue criminal charges, but this could change. Chief spoke as confident in his stance as a sovereign Gitxsan hereditary leader, in that he hasn't broken any laws because he was arrested in his unceded lands. And so he continues to fight for Indigenous rights. So Tansei, Chief, I thank you for being here, and I invite you to speak about what's happening in your territories and what you're doing in this battle against the corporations and the judicial systems that are challenging your rights and sovereignty.
Thank you for having me on the panel. Yeah, it's been 2 years since our arrests for blockading the railway, for asserting our rights to our land. 2 years without actually a day in court. The issues still continue. The slow theft of our lands is still continuing. We still have yet to fully assert our ownership of our land. It's a process that will take the rise of all of our people to do this. There's a continued denial by the governments in Canada and British Columbia since the Delgamuukw court case. In that court case, the highest court in the land that recognized our title. It was 24 years ago. 2 years ago, a lower court totally dismissed that recognition from that court when they issued an injunction against us on our land and accused us of trespassing. That lower court recognized that CN had title to our lands. In seeking an injunction, the normal process is to bring your title into the court and prove that you have title to that land. That process wasn't done. They didn't even ask CN to prove their title. Didn't ask them to provide any title. They just recognized or acknowledged that they must have title. It's a biased ruling that totally ignored our 16,000 plus years of occupation on this land. With the criminalization of our people in this process, it clearly shows that Canada and British Columbia will not change their view on the Indigenous people. At any time in the near future, there's no acceptance of our sovereignty, because our sovereignty literally means that Canadian and provincial sovereignty do not exist. There can only be one with title. And in this case, it is clearly the Gitxsan. We did blockade to protect our rights, which are the same as the Wet'suwet'en. Their rights were being trampled on. It's going on 3 years now, but at that time it was the second year of the invasion of the Wet'suwet'en. For the Gitxsan to leave it and not do anything meant our rights and our title were being diminished and eroded by the same people. Our arrests after were to bring the title issue into court, but also it was to bring people, the Gitxsan and such, aware, make them aware that this could happen to us as well. And clearly it did. So, thank you.
Hi, Chief. I'll be coming back to you. I'd like to also introduce now Martin Peters. He's a Vancouver lawyer with 35 years experience, and he represents Chief Spoke, the Gitxsan. He has also represented Wet'suwet'en land defenders. So he has been spending most of his time defending land defenders charged with contempt of court from alleged breach of injunction. So Martin, I invite you to talk about the work that you're doing and the significance of that.
Sure. Thank you for inviting me to be part of your panel. I guess first off, we have to sort of cast this in how it works in British Columbia. Where you have circumstances like the Wet'suwet'en, which were challenging the building of a pipeline through the middle of their territory, or the Gitxsan, who are challenging the existence of a railroad through the middle of their territory, which has been there for 120 years without anybody offering any compensation or even discussing land use or rent. My work has been focused on defending land defenders when they are charged with contempt of court arising from the British Columbia Supreme Court issuing injunction orders. So I hope this isn't over legal, but when CN, as Chief Spoke was talking about, or in the case of Wet'suwet'en, Coastal GasLink go into court to get an injunction, they are asserting private rights, the same rights that every citizen that every citizen has in terms of the rights to contract, the rights to conduct work issued pursuant to a government permit. These are private rights, which are then asserted through a lawsuit commenced by Coastal GasLink or CN, and then an injunction order with an enforcement clause is sought to protect the construction or the resource extraction that is going on. Now, starting in, I guess, 2019, I started defending land defenders in the Wet'suwet'en territory, and I have done that in 2019 and 2020. In total, I guess about 26 people were charged at 2 different arrest times. The British Columbia Prosecution Service concluded in both cases that it was not in the public interest to proceed with charges. I managed to convince them of that. And similarly, in 2020, Chief Spoke and 12 others were arrested, asserting their rights to their land, and they're arrested on their land, as were the Wet'suwet'en. The interesting thing is that the rights that Chief Spoke and the Wet'suwet'en are seeking to uphold are recognized in the Canadian Constitution. The bizarre thing is that the British Columbia Supreme Court has so far really not effectively applied what the Supreme Court of Canada has said and what our Court of Appeal has said, which establishes that Aboriginal interests at least need to be dealt with when injunctions are sought, which did not occur in either case of the Wet'suwet'en or the Gitxsan. So there's a disconnect in terms of applying the law, which the Supreme Court has upheld, to some extent helpful in terms of protecting constitutional rights, Aboriginal rights, but not sufficient, because when you're balancing jobs on the one hand and constitutional sovereign rights of the Gitxsan First Nations people on the other, these go into an equal balance. I mean, how can the right to contract, the right to a job, be balanced against a sovereign right to a people over territory they've held or as Chief Spoke said, 16,000 years. The Supreme Court has recognized that the Aboriginal peoples tend to lose when that's an equal balance. But why is it an equal balance? Why shouldn't sovereign rights recognized by the Constitution trump private rights to contract or private rights to extract resources pursuant to government-issued permits? Anyway, that's my focus in terms of doing this work on behalf of Chief Spoke and the Gitxsan peoples.
Hi. Thank you for sharing. Again, we'll be coming back to you. I'd like to introduce another lawyer. We have Stephen Donziger with us. He's an advocate, a writer, and public speaker on human and Indigenous rights and corporate accountability. He's based in New York City and is known for leading the international legal team that won a historic $9.5 billion judgment against Chevron on behalf of Indigenous peoples and rural farmers in Ecuador. Chevron retaliated against Stephen by orchestrating a civil lawsuit and private criminal prosecution, which resulted in an unprecedented imprisonment and home confinement for nearly 1,000 days for a minor misdemeanor offense involving contempt of court. The United Nations Working Group on Arbitrary Detention and a panel of international trial monitors recently ruled Stephen's detention and trial violated multiple provisions of international law and ordered the US government to release him immediately and pay compensation. Now, Stephen is coming to us from his home in New York, and he is still under house arrest. We welcome you here with us, Stephen. Thank you for being here. Can you speak a little bit about your work representing the Indigenous peoples in Ecuador and this huge oil and gas company coming after you?
Sure, Brandy. Thank you for inviting me. Thank you to Cultural Survival, Chief Spoke, Mr. Peters, and the other panelists. It's an honor. Basically, my situation, I want to sort of maybe broaden the perspective a little bit here by saying that the effort to prosecute Chief Spoke and possibly the others who participated in that blockade is part of a larger, and I would say very worrisome, playbook that has been invented by the fossil fuel industry to silence people who have the courage, as Chief Spoke has shown he has, to criticize and get in the way of, activities that not only, I think, run roughshod over Indigenous land rights and resource rights, but also really threaten to destroy our planet. And the battle that the chief and Mr. Peters are engaged in right now is critically important. There is no, in my opinion, as a lawyer, there's no rule of law country. And, Canada purports to be a rule of law country, as does the United States, that should ever allow a private corporation to take control of the prosecutorial machinery of government, to go after an individual and potentially deprive them of their liberty, as in the chief's case, but in my case, actually deprive the person of their liberty. To understand how it happened here, Chevron, again, the company that I helped Indigenous peoples in Ecuador win a $10 billion pollution judgment against, got a US judge to charge me with criminal contempt of court when I refused to turn over my electronic devices to Chevron that contain all sorts of privileged information, privileges being held by the people of Ecuador. I appealed that civil discovery order, and the judge charged me with a crime. It's never happened before in the United States, and it is pure political and corporate retaliation facilitated by a judge, just like the judge in Vancouver, in my opinion, authorized CN Rail to privately prosecute the chief and his colleagues. And both cases have something very important in common, which is, in both cases, the public prosecutor refused to prosecute. The Crown prosecutor in British Columbia refused, And here in Manhattan, where I live, the Southern District of New York, which is the federal prosecutor, refused to prosecute me. In my case, the judge, Judge Kaplan, appointed a private law firm that had represented Chevron, a flagrant conflict of interest. And just like the judge in Vancouver, basically turning over to a private corporation the public interest and the discretion to prosecute someone criminally and deprive them of their liberty. That's not the rule of law. And this is a playbook, I believe, invented by Chevron and its lawyers here in New York, Gitxsan, Dunn and Crutcher. And they want to inspire people and companies around the world and judges to do the same thing. And I think the judge in Vancouver got inspiration from this. And I just want to say it's a dangerous trend. The fact that it's happened in these two highly developed, rich countries, you know, the United States and Canada, is very worrisome. These are two countries that, as you know, look, let's not kid ourselves. I mean, both are conquering nations that have run roughshod over indigenous rights historically, but they hold themselves out as rule of law nations to the world. And if it's happening in these two countries, think of how more easily it could happen in other countries. So we need to think big and understand that the battle that Mr. Peters and the chief are engaged in British Columbia has ramifications for the entire world. In terms of that kind of discrete issue, there's larger ramifications that are even more significant as well. But that discrete issue is worrisome because that's the playbook to try to silence activists, campaigners, indigenous peoples all over the world as the battle over the planet and the battle to shut down the fossil fuel industry continues in the coming years.
Hi, Stephen. Thank you. I'll be coming back to you as well. I'd now like to introduce Raul Takaj. Is that how you pronounce your name? Takaj? Is it Raul? Okay, thank you. So he is Maya Q'eqchi, and he's from Chinabinque, El Astor, Guatemala. Raul graduated as a teacher of urban primary education in 1994, and he obtained a teaching degree from the University of San Carlos in 2007. He also has a bachelor's degree in intercultural bilingual education. He currently works as a teacher in the Ministry of Education of Guatemala in the Soquela village of the same municipality. He's the co-founder of Estorina Association for Integral Development, and he also holds knowledge and experience regarding resolution with land conflicts, legal certainty, water and territory, legal support for Indigenous peoples in cases of discrimination and violation of the rights to life and freedom of expression. Tanik Raul, I'll hand this over to you to talk about what you're facing in your territories and what's being done about that. Hi.
Soy Chologin Chocolate Cacobón, Q'eqchi. Para iniciar, muy buenos días. Una invocación de los abuelos mayas dice así: Oh tu Tzacol Bitol, míranos, escúchanos, no nos dejes, no nos desampares, corazón del cielo y corazón de tierra. Quiero comentar nuestra experiencia después de vivir la criminalización y humillación en nuestro país. En el marco del acuerdo de paz firmado en el año de 1936, un 29 de diciembre, nos marca como pueblo maya, como pueblos indígenas, una brecha, un espacio para poder manifestar nuestros derechos como pueblo. A partir de esos acuerdos sobre identidad de los pueblos indígenas, surge en nuestro territorio las radios comunitarias. En este caso, un 5 de marzo del 2017, surge nuestra radio comunitaria denominado Voces del Cerro. Esta radio ha servido para el pueblo maya Q'eqchi para comunicar, informar, educar desde su propio idioma. El idioma que se manifiesta es en el idioma Q'eqchi y en español. Se manifiesta y se comunica al pueblo lo que ocurre en nuestro territorio. El 26 de septiembre de 2019, el Estado de Guatemala declara un estado de sitio en nuestro territorio, después de tener la radio comunitaria Chiapsulta'a. ¿Por qué el allanamiento? Porque el estado de sitio ocurre apoyando siempre los que dirigen las grandes jerarquías del ejército. Tuvimos 3 meses la radio sin encender por la misma criminalización, por el mismo discriminación que vivimos, perseguimiento que tuvimos en nuestro medio. Después de un año, nuevamente el Estado de Guatemala, en el tiempo de actual presidente Jimmy Yamatei, declara nuevamente estado de sitio en nuestro territorio, especialmente en el municipio de Izabal, por intereses extractivos que circulan en nuestro medio. Para nosotros ha sido un momento difícil. Nos hemos prestado como comunicadores a la población, como radio, como dirigentes o como defensores de derechos. Acudimos a las instancias para manifestar lo que hemos vivido como pueblo maya Q'eqchi en nuestro municipio. Y nuestra lucha sigue. Y nuestra lucha seguirá hasta que el Estado de Guatemala entienda y reconozca nuestro derecho como pueblo Q'eqchi. En este sentido, insistimos al Estado de Guatemala para que reconozca que las radios comunitarias es un apoyo más para que las comunidades entendamos que nos formemos y que podemos defender nuestro territorio. Lastimosamente, las tierras no se cuentan con certezas jurídicas. Es una de las manifestaciones, la información que se comunica en nuestra radio, en nuestro territorio. Y con toda esa lucha que vivimos como pueblo, hemos sido siempre discriminados, perseguidos por el Estado de Guatemala, por defender nuestros derechos, por informar a la comunidad sobre lo que ocurre en nuestro medio. Y recientemente, con todo el allanamiento de las radios comunitarias en nuestro Guatemala, se crea una demanda ante la Corte Interamericana de Derechos Humanos, manifestando lo que nosotros vivimos como pueblos. El año 2021, el año pasado, se logró la sentencia ante el Estado de Guatemala para que reconozca y valore el derecho de los pueblos indígenas. Aún así, manifestamos también para que sean aprobados una iniciativa que ya años, 15 o 20 años se lleva planteándola ante el Estado de Guatemala, la iniciativa 4087. Y es uno de los logros que actualmente vivimos como pueblo, contar con nuestras radios comunitarias. Entendemos que es un derecho desde los acuerdos de paz. Seguimos luchando, seguimos formando, aunque en nuestro territorio entendemos de que existe el tema de la corrupción, nos es mucho difícil también acceder, ¿verdad? Y la justicia, entendemos que no es para el pueblo, es para los que tienen los intereses altos, ¿no? ellos manifiestan y siguen manipulando nuestros ideales. Agradezco mucho esta intervención. Entendemos que esa es la lucha que estamos haciendo, que estamos viviendo desde la llegada de los españoles en nuestro país. Muchas gracias.
Hi, Raul. Thank you. Thank you for sharing. I look forward to connecting with you again. And I am also introducing our fifth panelist. We have Dr. Lao Prasad, who's joining us all the way from Nepal. He holds a PhD from the School of Languages, Literature, and Cultural Studies Center for Linguistics and English, Jawaharlal Nehru University, New Delhi. And he has also worked as Chief Research Officer at the National Foundation for Development of Indigenous Nationalities, the Ministry of Local Development, Government of Nepal, and he is the founder director of the Research Institute for Curatology in Kathmandu. And he's been writing about his endangered mother tongue. And he's an advisor to the Sunuwar Welfare Society, an organization involved in the battle against hydroelectric dams on the Likhu River. So welcome, Dr. Lao. Thank you for being here. Please share what is happening in your territories there with the hydroelectric dams and the criminalization of Indigenous land defenders.
Thank you, Brandy, and a cultural survivor team, and all our panelists. Yeah, I will focus on three main questions that sent to us. There's how this industry and authorities hold or wield so much power. In this, what I quite frequently stress that theoretically, the rulers of colonizers are driven by the Darwinian theory, and they believe in theory and practice that survival of the fittest and for the fittest. But we indigenous people and the indigenism believes that it's survival for all. Due to their belief and practice, the state or the rulers or colonizers state has become vampire rather than welfare state. So due to this vampire state, in recent public hearing, we know that 400,362 square meter land has already been damaged and grabbed by the private company and the government. And due to this damage, we indigenous people, Q'eqchi or Sunuwar indigenous people and other indigenous people like Tamang and other groups, we have a lot of damage and loss there. And number one, we have Ning fish species, that aquatic life is totally damaged, that's gone. And honeybees, totally gone. And cemeteries of our ancestors whom we worship is also gone, damaged. And environmental harmony is lost due to air pollution, water pollution, noise pollution, and flooding and soil erosion. And number five, socio-cultural harmony also is gone due to the inter-indigenous or caste groups conflict there in this area. And ecology of peace also is totally disturbed, biodiversity gone, pasture land gone. And number nine, violation of right to information is also not respected because they haven't informed us FP, like pre and prior informed consent in their own mother tongue and other related issues. And this is only Lihu 1 and 2 and A. Now 9 other private projects are coming in the same river. So when all these 12 or dozen of projects go in full, indigenous people will have very bad consequences and effect. And regarding compensation, though they have a lure of corporate social responsibility budget, it's mentioned in their EIA report, but it's not equally and fairly distributed as promised in their written document, and very minimal and nominal pennies have been offered to the affected people. And when they ask for that, they abuse and misbehave the indigenous people in those land territories of the project. And for example, Q'eqchi, Sunuwar and his family members were called off by district administration office. We call it here CDO, and they were harassed and they were in a way criminalized in this case while asking for their land rights. And 23 other families also are in danger of displacement from the area. And this is public. When we had public hearing recently, and the projects are not completed yet. It's around 70 to 80%. And when other projects also run, the situation will be very, very painful and dangerous for the indigenous ones in the project areas. Thank you.
Wow. Hi, thank you. I'm coming back to you, Dr. Lao. Thank you for sharing. It's devastating to hear about the impacts that this is causing. I'm gonna go back to Chief Spoke. I have a couple of questions that I'm gonna combine into one for you, and our goal is to limit our answers to 4 minutes for time's sake. So Chief, why is it important for Gitxsan laws to be upheld? And also at the same time, how do you stay grounded amidst these violations happening against your nations and your human rights?
Well, without acknowledgement of Gitxsan laws on the land, we'll be in a position for years and years of colonial trespass on the land. Without a doubt, the Canadian and the provincial governments will not hand over the land that they're through the number of years, the 155 plus years that they've been here. They've been in this long, slow theft of our lands. Everything that they've done throughout their existence has been to steal our land, everything. Residential schools, murdering our children, burying in unmarked graves and such. Everything that they've done has been in the pursuit of our lands. This is so wrong for our people. They've set a goal of extinguishment. They've set a goal of totally destroying the indigenous people of this land. I look at the history in South America and such, of the actual wars and such. It seems as we've gone further north, in the colonization wars. Fortunately, in British Columbia, there has been not as many violent conflicts. So our position for seeking our rights and our full ownership of our lands is possibly easier than the people who have faced conflicts before is. And through the years, the punishment for standing up to the colonists has perhaps diminished, although it seems to be a resurgence in what they're attempting to do to our people. To see the techniques that they've used elsewhere being used here certainly is a problem for us. But clearly, if we don't seek to impose our laws and assert our ownership of our lands, then it makes it easier for the oppressors and the colonizers to move in and occupy our lands. What they're doing to the Indigenous people of this nation called Canada is no different from what is happening or what has happened in Crimea. And the world has acted outraged at the Russians invading Crimea. And the world is bothered very much by the Russians sitting on the border of Ukraine at this time. But picture what we've gone through the years. It is virtually the same thing. It is an invading force that is occupying our lands. They can only be one with title to this land. And their highest court has acknowledged and recognized that our title exists. There can only be one, and that's us. But we have to act on it. If we don't act, then they will never leave.
Mm. They will just keep taking. Yes, hi. Martin, so why do you think the judicial system doesn't honor its own decisions here in Canada, such as Delgamuukw versus Gitxsan, which upheld the Gitxsan and Wet'suwet'en titles to their territories? This was this was like 25 years ago. Why are they not honoring that, in your opinion?
Let me first talk a bit about Delgamuukw, and then I think I can answer your question by reference to what happened with the Wet'suwet'en and their challenge to the Coastal GasLink injunction. Delgamuukw was a decision of the 1997 decision of the Supreme Court of Canada. Mr. Delgamuukw was Gitxsan. He, together with the Wet'suwet'en, challenged their rights to their land. The Supreme Court, in a fabulous decision, defined the indicia of Aboriginal rights and title for the first time. They said that this was unique to Canadian law and needed to be dealt with uniquely. Title is held communally amongst First Nations peoples. It's not restricted to practice, custom, or tradition. And significantly, occupancy creates a special bond and a distinct culture. And where occupancy can be established, what's called pre-sovereignty, which in British Columbia is 1871, where that occupancy can be established, then title is granted to the First Nations people. And that certainly applies to the Wet'suwet'en and the Gitxsan, who have been there for tens of thousands of years. In the Wet'suwet'en case, this was a pipeline being built through the middle of their territory, and it's still being built. There was a challenge to the injunction order which resulted in the initial arrests in 2019 and 2020. It's interesting to look at that in response to your question, because Justice Church, who upheld the injunction, did so on basically three bases. She said, well, there's uncertainty about your outstanding claims because title hasn't been settled. This is directly contrary to the Supreme Court of Canada in a decision called Haida Nation, which indicated that even unrecognized claims need to be considered in terms of injunctions. Justice Church also looked at, she said, well, there's a lack of cohesion. The Wet'suwet'en can't even agree. We have elected Indian bands who are pro the pipeline, and hereditary chiefs are against the pipeline. So if you guys can't sort it out, I'm going to consider that in terms of the balance of convenience. That fails to acknowledge that the elected Indian bands' declarations in favor of the pipeline had nothing. They had nothing to do with the territory. They were not responsible for the territory in which the pipeline was going through. And essentially, what had happened is Coastal GasLink had just spread an awful lot of money around very poor communities to obtain the support of elected Indian bands. These are Indian bands elected pursuant to the Indian Act, which is a colonial construct of the government. You balance that, and Chief Justice Church balanced that against the declarations of the hereditary chiefs, who are saying, look, we have always controlled this land, and you should acknowledge what we say. We're against this pipeline. The last and most important thing that ruled against the Wet'suwet'en was, she said, Justice Church said, well, you're engaging in self-help remedies. You're blocking trucks, you're blocking roads, and you're undermining the rule of law. I mean, that's the key point. Undermining the rule of law negates the fact that the rule of law includes the Constitution, which includes recognized and affirmed Aboriginal and treaty rights. So what's happening in the BC Supreme Court, unlike the Supreme Court of Canada and the Court of Appeal, is that the rule of law is being very narrowly constrained, very narrowly defined to basically my law as a judge. I issued an injunction and I'm going to enforce it. And if you breach it, I'm going to prosecute you because the BC Prosecution Service won't do it. That fails to consider that the rule of law includes all laws, and certainly must include those laws which have been recognized by the Supreme Court of Canada and are included in Section 35 of the Constitution Act. I'm sorry if that was too legal, but.
No, thank you so much for explaining. Thank you for the work that you're doing to help defend Indigenous land defenders within Canada, which is essentially, breaking its own laws. Stephen, I'd like to ask you, in your opinion, like, why are, corporations and judicial systems, like, why are they given so much power over human rights, human Indigenous rights? And what are the dangers of this happening, given that Indigenous people protect, about 80% of, Earth's biodiversity, and we are, in a climate emergency?
Thank you. I'll say this. The topic we're talking about today, to me, is the most important topic in the world right now. How it plays out is going to determine whether our planet survives. The fact that, the 400 or 500 million Indigenous peoples around the world are the frontline defenders of the planet, and most resources, oil, gas, mining, are under Indigenous territory, will determine so much of what future generations can do and how they can live and whether we can be in a sustainable world. So, when I see a judge, in Vancouver do what he did to authorize a private criminal prosecution, I don't just see like a legalistic thing. I see an existential threat to all of us. And we need to sort of draw this out. The law is a very curious thing. When something happens in a court and it takes the definition of legal, even if it's wrong, it has a psychological impact on people. People think, oh, I guess it's okay. It's the law. This happened to me. I've been, just so people know a little bit about me, I've been in detention on a misdemeanor, which is the most minor crime possible in the United States, where the maximum sentence is 180 days in prison. And by the way, I'm innocent. My case is on appeal, and I believe I got railroaded, but let's just assume I'm guilty. The maximum sentence is 180 days in prison, and I have been, today's my 924th day in detention. Now, how did that happen? And if you sort of look at how it played out, I was prosecuted by a Chevron law firm, and a judge who sentenced me had financial ties to Chevron. But it was all legal, technically. And I think we need to sort of think about this a little bit differently. Just because something happens in a court with a judge doesn't mean it's really legal. Because I have seen personally in my case, in other cases, and I believe in the chief's case, violations of the law by judges. There's a concept we talk about in my world called lawfare, which is basically warfare through the law. In the old days in the United States, there were just flat out massacres of native peoples to steal land and resources. That doesn't happen anymore. That would be too obvious. So there's other more sophisticated means that are utilized to silence people so that the conquering forces can get access to the resources and call it all legal. So I would urge people, when you hear the word law or court, and look, I'm a lawyer, I respect the law, and I respect judges generally. Want to be clear about that. But be critical, because just because it's legal doesn't make it right. And often because it's called legal, it's just a cover-up for a subterfuge that is happening behind the curtains. And I would argue that's what's happening to Chief Spoke. And the whole issue of the unceded title, and I agree with the chief that must be dealt with. He is totally right to say that if you don't assert your rights, the occupying forces will just take the stuff and not care. So Canada, like the United States and like Guatemala and so many other countries, like Ecuador, where I do a lot of work, has so many unresolved issues. But this conflict, make no mistake about it, is the most important conflict in the world today, and it requires massive citizen mobilization led by frontline defenders, led by Indigenous groups, with allies who are non-Indigenous, who get it. Because you know what? We all have a major stake in this battle, because it will determine whether we live or die. And that's the bottom line to me.
Yes, thank you. I please stick around. I have some questions afterwards for all of the panelists to discuss together. I would like to go to Raul now. So the Felix mine, which is a mining development that has impacted your communities there. It was formerly owned by one of Canada's oldest mining companies, Hudbay Inc. And there were various atrocities committed by this company, including rape and of Mayan women, and the clearing of communities there. But no one is being held accountable for the violence that mine has brought there, given that it was owned by this so-called democratic human rights upholder, Canada, and it's now owned by a different company out of Europe. Why is no one held accountable? Why are they able to get away with this violence there?
Bueno, en nuestra realidad, en nuestro territorio, entendemos muy bien de que para que ingrese algún proyecto fuera del país, una de las ideas que se maneja en nuestro territorio es que debe de consultar. El mayor problema que ha habido últimamente en nuestro territorio es que la empresa que hoy que es dirigido por el país de Rusia está en un proceso de que debe de consultar a los pueblos indígenas sobre las concesiones que hoy tienen. ¿Y qué ha pasado en nuestro municipio? Es que nadie responde, ni el Estado, porque son los mismos quienes también venden nuestro territorio sin antes consultar. Se ha dividido, o sea, las empresas, por supuesto, dividen los líderes. En este caso, por ejemplo, se entiende que pareciera que ya han hecho una preconsulta y consulta sin tomar en cuenta a las personas realmente afectadas por la empresa. Y prueba de ello de que hay muchas intimidaciones, hay persecuciones, encarcelamiento a líderes que están en proceso y algunos han sido libres y otros han sido fallecidos por esta lucha. Y lo que viene y lo que defendemos, pues nadie responde. En nuestro caso, pues son pocas las instituciones quienes hablan sobre la defensa de derechos de pueblos indígenas. Y lo que ha pasado últimamente es que las instituciones que manifiestan su rechazo sobre lo que ocurre en nuestro medio, sobre la contaminación del agua, la destrucción de nuestros cerros, la contaminación del aire, todo eso es perseguido. Últimamente en Guatemala, todos los líderes quienes manifiestan su rechazo, algunos se han muerto en el área donde estamos. Para nosotros es preocupante, pues la razón de la radio pues también se informa y defender esa parte para que las comunidades estén informados para no aceptar cualquier proyecto. En este caso nosotros el mayor temor es que el mismo gobierno no ha obedecido las leyes internacionales quienes defiende nuestro territorio, el caso de convenio 169 de la OIT y la cuestión de derechos humanos sobre integridad de derechos de los pueblos indígenas, no se ha cumplido. En este caso ha violado nuestro derecho. ¿Cómo es posible que cuando se hace una consulta no es en el área, verdad? Entonces, para nosotros, recientemente pues se hace una manifestación y se continúa para que las comunidades también tengan resistencia y puedan tomar sus decisiones tomando en cuenta sus autoridades desde la cosmovisión, desde la originalidad de su cultura, de su forma de vivir. Entendemos esa parte de que el mismo Estado no ha respondido defender y obedecer las leyes que amparan los derechos que tenemos como pueblo. Últimamente entendemos que en Guatemala los organismos judiciales no se pueden, están realmente cooptados. Entonces ya como que ya no existía el respeto sobre las leyes que amparan nuestro territorio. Y hay una serie de contaminación, ¿verdad? La contaminación del agua, la contaminación del aire, la destrucción total de nuestros cerros. Entonces, la pregunta es, ¿qué pasará cuando el gobierno no acata, no responde, no respeta la organización de los pueblos en nuestro país? Es muy preocupante, entendemos de que toda la riqueza, todo lo que vivimos como pueblo, respetamos, valoramos, defendemos nuestro territorio. Entonces, una de las razones, como digo, en las áreas a veces no hay organizaciones que también manifiesten al rechazo. Entonces, lo que se busca que la vida de nuestras generaciones pues puedan gozar y que no sintamos como culpable al no defender. Pero entonces la cuestión que estamos viviendo en Guatemala es que hay persecución total, hay encarcelamiento, hay intimidaciones, hay también ofrecimiento de desarrollo, pero cuando en realidad no es el desarrollo que estamos viendo en nuestro país, pero en nuestras comunidades hay mucha necesidad, pero tener una empresa no cumple, no ve el desarrollo que puede tener nuestro territorio. Ya, entonces, ¿qué va a pasar cuando esto se acaba? Cuando todo lo que harán todo es destrucción, enfermedad, pobreza en su totalidad. Entonces, como organización, llevamos años pues de defender esa parte y aún así pues también el gobierno no responde, ni los funcionarios locales, funcionarios departamentales quienes responden. Fue esta noche también como entender como medio de comunicación, seguir luchando para que el Congreso, el Estado entiende y aprueba la ley o la iniciativa 4087 también que nos ayude a promover y dar a nuestros pueblos. Muchas gracias.
Tanik Raul, thank you. This is really difficult. This is really difficult to hear of these atrocities that are happening in these territories. Like, you know how bad they are, but when you're face to face in a situation like this, I hear your heart and how you speak for your people, and I hear that pain. And I just pray and hope that, you know, things can shift across the board. I'm going to go to Dr. Lao. So there's been about 70% of this project, this hydroelectric dam done on the river there, and pollution of the water and the air and the land. And you said that it's caused complete devastation. How are the people coping? Because we know as Indigenous people, we are intrinsically connected to our lands. If our lands are destroyed, so are we. How are they surviving right now, mentally, physically, spiritually?
Yeah, our people and we people are facing a very, very bad situation and devastating one there. And in most of the cases, these people are losing their homelands, houses day by day, piece by piece, and inch by inch. As I told you, this is the only beginning of 3 projects, Lihu 1, Lihu 2, and Lihu A. But although there are other companies holding 9 more licenses in the same river. So when all these licenses start the real field work in the river area, we will have other horrible days. And most of the people, most of the people there now facing very dangerous situation of livelihood there. As I told, 9 damages V4 also. We are in the position of, we are in the grasp of tricksters, These vampires overnight are just looking or desiring for money, money, and money. And here it's very helpful to quote Mahatma Gandhi, that the Mother Earth has given us what you need, but not every man's desire. So their desire and their greed, out of this greed, we people there, living for centuries and ages very peacefully, now they have blasting noises and the houses have developed cracks and the road extensions and track opening with their dozer, okay? We call it kind of dozer development in our hilly areas and Himalayan regions of the country. So we have a very panicking and painful situation undergoing there. And lots of damages, as I told, this Nengfish aquatic life, because it's related to our cultural and ritual life, and we need that fish, and that fish now is instinct.
Wow.
And people gradually will be shifting to other places perhaps, and most of them in the past were sold to the British Empire, the colonizer, and most of them have given up the land in pennies and are leaving the homeland.
Wow. I would love to pose a question to everybody and just give you the opportunity to converse before we go into a Q&A from our audiences. So I'm going to do a 2-in-1, and you're welcome to answer. Put your hand up if you'd like to answer. So are you comforted knowing that you're not alone in this battle? And what advice would you give to other land defenders on the front lines? So given today, bringing us together from around the world, the commonalities that we're seeing, do you feel comfort knowing that there are allies out there? And what advice would you give, Dr. Lao?
Yeah, we are not alone on this Mother Earth. There are indigenous people all over the world or corners of this planet, Mother Earth, and we are the keepers of the earth, okay? And there are people like now Elon Musk who want to colonize Mars and just migrate from this Mother Earth to Mars. So it's a kind of a nightmare for us. And due to this, they are going to destroy each and every corner of this planet and exploit the Mother Earth only to fulfill their greed and desires unnecessarily. And we need to unite. United we stand, divided we fall. And these ruler groups or colonizers are the ones who know how to divide these indigenous people and rule them and crush them. So we are not alone. We need to unite each other. We need to let our situations in each and every corners of this mother planet, what's going on, and we need to work together. We need to unite together to fight these colonizer vampires.
Hi, thank you so much. Would anybody else like to speak about allyship and advice? Spoke?
Yeah. Hearing the stories of Dr. Lao and Raul, because it makes it really clear to me living here that things are literally easier here for us to take the battle for our lands, to bring it to the forefront. As in dealt with that decision in court, it brought it to the world, and the world has been using that decision. But here we are, so far along in our assimilation process that it seemingly is easier to live in this civilization that the colonists has put forward, and where our lands are being stolen right from under us. We're not facing the same adversities that other nations, other Indigenous people in other nations are facing. It's not as extreme here. But, and so when we talk about going to war for our lands, we're here, although the policemen and their enforcement like to take the word literally, war, literally. When we say go to war, it may be as simple as 10,000 Gitxsan going into the street and screaming at the top of their voice, "This is our land," and asserting their ownership and picking a particular spot within the nation, identifying an area within the nation where that is so strategic that if you were to act and all of your people were to come out and all of the other nations were to come out and stand with you, you can make real change without the violence that is imposed on our Indigenous neighbors. So I feel a responsibility and a resurgence of the drive to do something. All the hazards and violence that's being faced by our Indigenous family from other nations.
Yes. Raul, I'm just wondering, do you feel encouraged today? I know that you shared that nobody responds to the crisis that is happening there, and that there's very few agencies that come to the defense of, the Indigenous nations there. Do you feel encouraged knowing now, that you have allies that are facing similar?
Sí, después de escuchar las intervenciones de los amigos interponentes, pues considero de que no solo es Guatemala la que vive la realidad. El poder hoy es más para los que manejan, los que dirigen los estados, y entiendo, y ese es para mí escuchar la problemática que vivimos. Entendemos que los gobiernos ya no piensan el desarrollo de su país, más bien piensan para el interés de ellos mismos. Pues considero yo de que como pueblos, como países, debemos de seguir con la resistencia. No queda de otro más que educándonos, formándonos, exigir nuestro derecho como pueblos, tanto de tierra, tanto de agua y tanto de bosques. Escucho la cuestión del cambio climático que hoy vivimos, totalmente preocupante, ¿verdad? En mismas empresas, mismas fábricas, como vemos, ¿verdad? Nuestras ciudades están totalmente contaminadas. Y nuestro deber, nuestro compromiso quizá como organizaciones, seguir velando y que también podamos entender que a los pueblos se deben de consultar. Al no consultar se violan derechos y no deben de comprar líderes. Eso es lo que últimamente lo vemos, ¿verdad? Entonces, si hablamos de tierra, realmente en nuestro país, pues el problema más grande es sobre la tierra. No hay certezas jurídicas. Las grandes extensiones de tierra lo tienen los mismos poderosos, ¿ya? Entonces, hoy ya ven que las comunidades viven en las montañas, igual no dejan en paz, los siguen despojando de sus tierras. Entonces, ¿dónde queda el derecho de pueblos indígenas? Entonces, para mí es satisfactorio escuchar la exposición, ponencia de nuestra realidad que vivimos como pueblo, como países, a los quienes han expuesto sus realidades.
Hi, thank you. This has been an incredible discussion. I am going to go to some questions from our audience members that have come up during this panel. So I have a question. Doesn't say who it's from, but I think this may be directed at Stephen. So who are the direct or indirect perpetrators, so the companies, government, military, other, that are to blame for these global issues? As it relates to Stephen's case, the perpetrator was Chevron, but does it go deeper than Chevron? She says, what I am trying to get at here is, are there at the core a handful of companies, militaries, or governments that are the enemy, whether we talk about Ecuador, Canada, or Nepal?
Thank you for the question. That's a complicated question in my view. Let me just say this before I answer it. I want to just acknowledge, first of all, Dr. Lao and Raul, Chief Spoke. Your experiences, your stories are deep, emotional, and illuminating. And, you know, as a non-Indigenous person, I honor you. You know, I've spent a lot of my years as a lawyer defending Indigenous peoples in Ecuador, but, you know, I was always learning much more from my clients than they ever learned from me. And I feel highly enriched by the honor of being able to do that with my life. Even though I'm paying a very deep price. And I actually believe part of the reason that this system is attacking me with such ferocity is because I'm white. The concept of alliances between enlightened non-Indigenous peoples and First, Nations peoples terrifies those who are opposed to Indigenous rights, terrifies. And I believe that is one explanation for why, I've been in detention over 900 days on a charge that has a maximum sentence of 180 days. And I really invite everyone, the Indigenous peoples, First Nations, to pray for me and do whatever you can to help protect me, because this is bizarre. Now, to get to the question, I think these are systemic issues. Yes, in my case, it's Chevron. In the Chief Spoke's case, it's Canadian National Rail. It's the judge in Vancouver, I forget his name, is it Branch? My judge, Judge Kaplan. They're all important factors, and individuals do have major discretion when they make decisions whether to adhere to the law or to violate the law in an effort to facilitate the conquering forces. And that can't be underestimated. Like there are individuals and companies that are causing serious harm, and they need to be held accountable as part of a broader movement to block this general trend toward really stealing the resources on lands that are held by Native peoples. But I do think, to simplify things as much as I can, given the limited time we have, I do think it is up to citizens, citizen movements, Indigenous movements, recognizing that the frontline defenders of the earth are the Indigenous peoples first and foremost, but everybody has a role to play, is absolutely critical. I mean, for example, right now in Belgrade, Serbia, okay, I know it's not an Indigenous issue, but there's a massive citizens movement to block the Rio Tinto Australian mining company from mining lithium that will destroy massive amounts of farmland. And they're on the front lines right now in front of Parliament trying to block this. And we need, as a broad coalition, in my view, to globalize activism. We need to connect with each other more, because the big companies, they move their resources and their capital around the world with a lot of ease. We're isolated in our silos. The chief is up in British Columbia. Now in this forum today, we're hearing this story. The people in Belgrade are in Belgrade, and I'm down in, Lago Agrio, Ecuador. I've taken 250 trips there from New York to do my work as a lawyer. We need to reconnect and have more of these forums and help each other and understand how all of our battles fit into a larger mosaic to save the planet and to save Indigenous land and the right to Indigenous resources. So, yeah, there's a lot of bad actors. Yeah, the system works in concert, I think, to try to silence people like Chief Spoke and myself and Raul and others and Dr. Lao. We need to have a broader vision, in my view, of what activism is and how it needs to become interconnected around the world to really successfully neutralize what these forces are trying to do to destroy Indigenous rights.
Absolutely. Thank you. So I have a question I'm going to pose to whoever would like to answer. I think, you know, any of the Indigenous panelists here could, you know, answer this. So it's from a young land defender who's living in Brownsville, Brooklyn. There's a lot of air pollution, and the National Grid has built a pipeline through their community. They're 19 years old, working with environmental groups for more informed advocacy, but they're wondering how they could be of more support to Native people on the front line in other places, on Turtle Island or around the world. How can they best be supportive? So either Dr. Lau or Raul or Chief Spoke or all of you could maybe offer some advice for young non-native land defenders, how they could be, you know, more helpful to ally in this fight.
Certainly with the amount of social media that is out there. And I say that from a person who has no online presence. The social media presence is huge, making people aware all over the world of the plight of our people it can't be underestimated. Now, with Stephen's help in regard to our battle with CN and through Twitter feeds and such, making so many more people aware of our battles and such, that it has indeed been a very big help. And if there's any violence happening that our people are facing, having these put out there it just can't be underestimated, because it is literally coming down to ensuring the safety of the people involved if the violence is exposed. And even if the perpetrators of that violence are aware that there is a social media presence that can be broadcast to everyone, then they will hesitate in their violence. So yeah, social media, financially, the obstacles that we face are huge.
Yeah.
The Canadian courts, for us, that is the one obstacle they throw in front of us as we go forward on this path to title. The cost for the Dogma court cases, massive. The cost for the litigation that we've been through. We actually haven't had a day in court in 2 years on the charges that we faced. Just preliminary stuff all the way along, but the costs have mounted. It's an obstacle that our people have faced, and our people will continue to face as we go forward.
Yes. Hi. Thank you, Dr. Lal or Raul. Do you have any advice for non-Indigenous people who want to help with this struggle? What advice would you give to them? What can they do?
Yeah.
Bueno, considero yo como la problemática que vivimos, ¿verdad? En nuestro país o nuestro territorio es que se respete los derechos, y la misma juventud tiene que entender de que el derecho de pueblos indígenas, contando en cuenta nuestros abuelos y abuelas quienes dirigen sus comunidades, la juventud debe de entender. Por ejemplo, la problemática que traen las empresas, en este caso, cuento la experiencia en nuestro país, ¿verdad? ¿Cómo es posible cuando se hace una preconsulta, consulta a los pueblos, teniendo presencia de militares, policías, gobernadores y otros agentes teniendo allanamiento, orden de captura, oyendo a la gente? Creo que eso no es una consulta, no es una consulta ilegal. Por lo tanto, es que como pueblo desconocemos totalmente en nuestro territorio y no ha habido consulta. Se está haciendo la lucha para que sea reconocido. Entonces, para la juventud y para los que exponemos, pues exijamos nuestro derecho y que el Estado y que los gobiernos también respeten y que no violen los derechos a los pueblos. Después de agotar tanto tema de diálogo, ¿y qué hace el Estado? Es crear estado de sitio para defender a quién, los intereses extractivos, los poderosos. Entonces, no podemos hablar de desarrollo hoy, por ejemplo, cuando hace falta escuelas, hace falta buenos caminos, hace falta hospitales teniendo empresas que supuestamente están para el desarrollo de un país y sinceramente lo vemos muy en desacuerdo el desarrollo pues, que no hay nada. Entonces, debe de respetar, debe de consultar en una paz, no es a través de violencia, no es a través de allanamiento, no es a través de capturas, eso no es una consulta, no es para entrar, para convencer a los pueblos. Tenemos derecho y nuestra palabra vale, ya.
Yes, thank you. Hi. Dr. Lao? Oh, you're on mute.
Yeah, in most of the cases, indigenous people are not decisive role. So they are the ones to address this climate crisis and climate emergency. They know the real locality and their corners where they are, and they can be the most useful people to save our mother planet. So the policymakers and lawmakers should always include the indigenous people to go hand in hand in this case. And as CP spoke, suggested that social media's role. And in our part of the world, we have less social media, and it's emerging these days, and we have less internet access. So we are keeping our Mother Earth's condition very safe, but very quickly these mainstream or the rulers group or the policymakers group or the money makers group are invading these safe areas very soon. So in this regard, for the case of development issues and all that, indigenous people should be part, okay, in that project or policy making or law making or whatever work. They are blaming us. These indigenous people don't want development. They want to live in cave life, back in the caves. So they are blaming us. They are blaming indigenous people in each corners of our Mother Earth. So in this regard, they should understand of this global warming and climate crisis and emergency. And we can do a lot. So they should include us in this development effort, and they should not go only for fulfilling their greeds and desires and over exploiting the Mother Earth.
Thank you. Hi, Dr. Lau. So I have a question I think maybe Martin can answer, and then I'm going to, after this question, I'm going to open it up to the panelists to see if you have questions for each other if we could have, some dialogue there before we wrap up. So this question is from Wet'suwet'en Hereditary Chief Namux, and he wrote to me regarding Chief Justice Church. So she stated, my injunction. He wants to know, can she be dismissive from court proceedings because of her taking personal ownership of the injunction? It seems to be an imbalance of justice. And he says, along the same lines, an RCMP officer said on the exclusion zone that he implemented an extension to the exclusion zone right there and without directions when we, the chiefs, went into the area. How could one officer assume that he can do that? Are you able to answer that?
I'll give it a try. There are a couple of important issues there. Thank you, Hereditary Chief Namuk. I think the most important issue you've touched upon is the issue of conflict of interest. And we saw this initially with the Trans Mountain Pipeline injunction order that it was implemented by, the order was made by Justice Affleck, who then proceeded to try 250 people for breaching his order. I mean, that is troubling when there's an obvious personal interest in the judge in terms of enforcing the order that he has or she has brought about in the case of Justice Church. The efforts in Trans Mountain to have Justice Affleck recused failed completely and were not upheld by the Court of Appeal. The language of Justice Church referring to her injunction order underlines the problem that she granted the order and now she's enforcing it. Or, we have, as Stephen mentioned, we have the circumstance in the Gitxsan case where Justice Branch, even when the BC Prosecution Service says that they don't see a public interest in proceeding, says, well, as far as I'm concerned, it's criminal and we are proceeding and CN will be carrying out that prosecution. This is a new development in Canada, and it used to be the case, going back to, say, Claycott Sound protests, that where a judge handed down an injunction order with an implementation clause, other judges would then take up the task of judging people as to whether they were in breach of that order. We don't seem to be in that world anymore, and we can see the problems with that from Justice Church, from Justice Affleck, and now most recently with Justice Branch in the Gitxsan case. The other point that you raised, Chief Namak, is the issue of exclusion zone, and that is a question of the discretion that is granted to the police in implementing the court order itself. And exclusion zone, as I was questioning, I don't normally go to bars, but I did meet an RCMP officer in Smithers, and I was asking him about the exclusion zone and the power of the police to basically make up the law on their own, which they're doing. And I said, where does this come from? And he said, well, we just made it up. Now, with any police officer implementing any law, including a judge-made law, there is some discretion as to when and how to do it, or whether to do it. In the case of the injunctions granted to Coastal GasLink, granted to CN, and granted to Trans Mountain Pipeline, the police have taken it upon, and we saw this also extensively at the Ferry Creek protest for old growth timber. The police, when granted the power of arrest, say of someone blocking a road, extend that or expand it so that it won't be simply the road which leads to the particular cut block that is being cut, but will expand sometimes hundreds of kilometers down the road. So the police essentially take a court order and make up the law themselves as to where the boundaries are.
Mm.
And it's troubling, and it's equally troubling that the police don't do this all by themselves. They have lawyers, and they have lawyers who tell them you can get away with this. I find that really difficult as a lawyer to think that another lawyer would be giving that kind of advice. But what we see, and we've touched upon the issue of injunctions and criminalizing land defenders, but and I think Dr. Lau touched on this, the power given to the police to implement these injunction orders is out of control. And it was dialed back to some degree by Justice Thompson and the Ferry Creek matters, because the police were, the capacity of the police to implement the court order was Justice Thompson found was a basis to simply remove the injunction or remove an extension of the injunction. He was overturned by the Court of Appeal. So that power of the police to basically take matters into their own hands has recently been upheld by the Court of Appeal.
Yes. Thank you. Hi for answering that question for Chief Namux. Now, we actually have to start wrapping up early. My apologies for extending the invitation for everybody to connect. We will have to do this again very soon, but I would like to extend the opportunity for each of the panelists to quickly share some closing thoughts, up to 2 minutes each. Your thoughts, anything that you would like to leave with the audience or with your fellow panelists. I just open that up to you right now. Let's see. Who would like to go first?
I'll
Sure. Sure.
I want to thank Dr. Lau for the word vampire, and
Yes.
even put it more politically by calling it systemic. But what we're talking about is the politics of colonialism, and in particular, the politics of capitalism.
Yeah.
Capitalism is not going to fix itself. Capitalism is not going to stop the world from burning down. What we have seen in Canada is effective, and we've seen it recently in Ottawa and Alberta, is the effect of civil disobedience. And Chief touched on that. If all of the Gitxsan were in the street, things would change very, very quickly. In 2020, when the blockades to CN Rail occurred across this country by the Mohawks and the Gitxsan and the Wet'suwet'en and their supporters in Vancouver, it brought the Canadian economy to its knees.
Mm-hmm.
And the government responded. They responded with negotiations that haven't gone anywhere, but they did respond. So the power of civil disobedience seems to be the only useful tool in the toolbox to get the capitalists and the governments who are supported by them to listen.
Yes. Hi, thank you. Stephen, would you like to share some closing thoughts?
Thank you to everybody. I'm inspired. Raul, Dr. Lau, Chief Spoke, Martin. Thank you for your work as a lawyer, your courageous work. I'm humbled to be asked to be a part of this panel. I'm honored. And Brandy, you're amazing. I think you're the future of journalism on a lot of these issues. So thank you for your work, and you run this thing beautifully. I feel you, I really do. You're an amazing woman. I also, if I can, just plug if people want to learn more about what I'm doing Please go to our website. It's called freedonziger.com, FREEDONZIGER. And there's tons of articles and information. And, you know, if you're so inclined, want to help with our defense fund, feel free to make a donation, but that's not really why I'm pushing this. Just please get engaged. I need solidarity, as do my clients, the 5 indigenous peoples in the northern Amazon of Ecuador who have suffered for 50 years because Chevron chose to deliberately dump cancer-causing oil waste onto their lands and into their waters as a way to save money. And thousands have died from this act of, you know, deliberate industrial poisoning. So, you know, it's all connected. The ability to advocate for people who get treated that way is really important. And we need to protect the people, and we need to protect the advocates who take on these, you know, complicated cases. So I thank all of y'all, and I'm humbled. I'm really deeply humbled to be a part of this. Thank you so much.
We're so grateful that you were able to join us, Stephen, and thank you for all the relentless advocacy that you have done for our peoples for all these years. Hi, Dr. Lao, some closing remarks.
Yeah, I am really honored and thankful to you all. And we are in this country, okay, a sort of stateless people. We don't have any state, and we don't have any people to hear our painful situations to share and to talk with. So on behalf of my people and many other around 100, it is known as 125 indigenous peoples in this country, on behalf of them. So I'm really happy to share our painful situation here. In this country, no one listens us, but I'm really honored to let you know and hear about our situations in this country. So all our indigenous nations, brothers and sisters from Guatemala and Canada, even America, and many other countries are participants, perhaps around 200 means around almost all indigenous nations from all corners of the world, of this Mother Earth, Mother Planet. I have heard our voices, because we are always unheard, and we are always suppressed. We are really voiceless in this country. And I hope all indigenous nations all over the world will just express their solidarity with each other in this pain. And this is the time to save our Mother Earth. Saving our Mother Earth means to save ourselves. Thank you.
Hi, thank you. It's such an honor to know you, Dr. Lal. I'm so grateful to be connected, and I want to stay connected with you. Also, Pastor Raul, would you like to say some closing remarks?
Pues igualmente agradecer esta convocatoria tan importante donde manifestamos nuestra realidad como pueblo, como países, y agradecer también a los países donantes quienes también han compartido nuestra realidad como pueblos, y pues y exhortar pues que nos sigan apoyando, porque imagínense luchar frente a un monstruos que viven en nuestro país, pues también es de mucha lucha, de mucho sacrificio, de mucho riesgo, por supuesto, en cuanto a nuestra comunidad, a nuestras lideresas quienes también luchan. Entonces, agradecer y seguir luchando para que el mismo Estado reconozca que existen leyes quienes protegen, quienes apoyan de cada país. En este caso, Guatemala, existen leyes, el convenio 169 de la OIT, todo eso en este caso, por ejemplo, también la sentencia que la Corte Constitucional ha dado por ejemplo, las empresas quienes están destruyendo nuestro medio ambiente, por ejemplo, Maya Níquel, CGN Pronico, palmeras, bananeras, huleras, un montón de empresas quienes también exhortamos, ¿no? El respeto a los derechos de los pueblos, al igual a los quienes manifiestan, ¿verdad? Cada país tiene su realidad. Entonces, invito pues a seguir organizando y no desanimar en esta lucha.
Hi, Raul. I have been researching a lot about what's happening in Guatemala, and I'm coming there very soon. I'm coming there to do some work as a journalist. So again, I'd love to stay connected with you as well. I'm just inspired. I'm moved. I'm heartbroken by the conversations we've had today. Again, I agree. We know that this is the most important battle of the ages that we live in, because the future of all is at stake. And our people, Indigenous nations, are on the front lines of this battle. But ultimately, this is something that affects all of humanity. It is about the health of our planet and the future of our generations to come. And ultimately, these violations to rights, human rights, Indigenous rights, land rights could be coming to you. Just because it's happening, in these territories that are far removed, this is indicative of what soon could happen to you. And your lands and waters, could be completely destroyed. So I encourage everybody to educate themselves about what's going on and to really wake up and get involved, and stand by the people that are affected by these atrocities, by the criminalization of human beings, just for protecting their very survival, their very rights to live and sustain themselves off the territories of which they come. I want to thank Cultural Survival. They came on board when I approached them to do this panel, and they've done an incredible job. I want to thank Ricochet Media and Ethan Cox, my editor there, for supporting all of my work. And again, hi to all of the panelists. I think this was an incredible discussion, and I look forward to doing this again in the future. I'm going to hand it back over to Daisy. Hi.
Yawanko, thank you so much to all the panelists for your wisdom and your expertise and your resilience, and bringing that here today, and allowing us to dive deep into this really important discussion. Yawanko, Brandy, and Ricochet Media for helping us co-host this event, and we look forward to continuing this discussion. This doesn't stop here. Thank you all to the attendees for joining us for these past 2 hours, and just asking all of our followers here to continue to follow our work on social media, Cultural Survival, as well as Ricochet Media and Brandy's coverage as well. So again, Yawanko, thank you so much. I hope you all have an amazing week. Yawa.
Hi. Thank you.
Thank you.
Adiós.
Thank you very much.
Thank you. There's power in the people, our numbers. We have to come into the streets at some point. Thank you.
I would love to stay connected, Dr. Lao and Raul. I would love to